A 50-foot ape wouldn't survive 10 seconds in the real world. Gravity would snap its bones before it took a single step. But what if the largest primate in history didn't die out? What if it just adapted? In October 2029, a biologist tracking her missing brother in the remote mountains of Vietnam recorded a low-frequency pulse. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't thunder. It was a hunting signal. And the creature making it had evolved to be smaller, quieter, and infinitely more terrifying. Let's explore the dark evolution of a real monster and why the shadows are no longer safe. This is the dark evolution of a real giant and the smaller, more terrifying form it would need to become in order to survive. To survive, this creature had to break the rules of its own anatomy. In 1935, paleontologist Ralph von Koenigswald entered a Hong Kong drugstore and examined fossil teeth sold as traditional dragon bones. Among them were enormous primate molars, unlike those of any living ape. They belonged to Gigantopithecus blacki, the largest ape currently known to science. The fossils are real. Almost everything people imagine around them is not. Scientists have recovered thousands of teeth and several partial jaws, but no confirmed complete skull, spine, pelvis, arm, or leg. That means its exact height, mass, posture, and locomotion remain uncertain. The familiar image of a 10-foot ape standing upright is not a recovered body. It is an inference built around a mouth. Its teeth tell a more defensible story. Gigantopithecus consumed tough forest vegetation and other plant foods. Its massive jaw was adapted for powerful chewing. For hundreds of thousands of years, that specialization worked. Then the environment became more seasonal. Forest communities changed. Preferred food became less reliable, and the chemistry preserved in its teeth shows increasing dietary stress. Between roughly 295,000 and 215,000 years ago, Gigantopithecus disappeared from the fossil record. Its extinction was not the sudden collapse of a movie monster. It was slower. Forest patches shifted. The foods its body depended on became harder to reach. More adaptable primates changed their diets and behavior. The giant ape appears to have failed that test. Its size had become a cage. That should be the end of the story. For Lena Voss, it was only the beginning. At 2:13 in the morning, she sat inside a survey shelter, 5 kilometers from the last position transmitted by Minh's radio. Rain tapped against the aluminum roof. Across the table, local tracker Bao Tran marked 3 nearby caves on a paper map. Minh had searched the northern cave 2 days before he vanished. He knew that mountain, Bao said. He would not get lost. Lena replayed her brother's final recording through headphones. The file sounded empty, but the spectrogram showed 4 pulses between 14 and 17 hertz, each separated by precisely 11 seconds. Not random thunder, not machinery. A sequence. The 5th pulse arrived through the ground. The water in Lena's metal cup formed concentric rings. A suspended lamp began to sway, even though the air inside the shelter was still. Bao stopped speaking and pressed both hands against his sternum. Lena felt pressure behind her eyes. Her peripheral vision narrowed. The map appeared to bend at the edges. Then her pulse accelerated so violently that she mistook it for footsteps beneath the floor. Outside, every insect had gone silent. Bao reached for the lantern. "Don't," Lena whispered. The lamp flickered once. Something struck the rear wall, not hard enough to break it, but with the slow, deliberate pressure of a hand testing a door. One rivet snapped free, then another. Bao switched off the light. The pressure stopped. For 20 seconds, neither of them moved. Lena could hear Bao trying not to breathe. Then the lamp, still glowing faintly as its filament cooled, slid across the table by itself. No, not by itself. The entire shelter had tilted several degrees toward the forest. Whatever stood outside had lifted one corner and lowered it again. By sunrise, the mud behind the shelter held no ordinary footprint. There was only a broad depression beside the wall, and 4 deep punctures arranged like the knuckles of a hand. On the aluminum panel above them, a smear of red clay reached nearly 6 feet from the ground. Caught in one torn rivet was a single black fiber. Lena sealed it in a sample tube. If it contained viable DNA, it could identify the animal that had approached them. More importantly, it might tell her whether Minh had been attacked or followed. But the sample would mean nothing unless they made it out of the mountains. The idea that a surviving population descended directly from Gigantopithecus is extraordinarily unlikely. There are no verified modern bones, hairs, photographs, or DNA. A breeding population of large primates would leave ecological traces. Science cannot replace missing evidence with an exciting story. But speculative evolution allows a narrower question. If an isolated branch had survived long enough to face the same environmental crisis, what changes would physics and natural selection demand? First, it would need to become smaller. Large mammals isolated by limited resources can evolve reduced body size over many generations, a pattern best documented on islands. A sealed valley is not literally an island, but steep limestone walls, fragmented forests, and narrow habitat corridors can create similar ecological isolation. The survivors would not be the largest animals. They would be the individuals able to live on less food, cross broken terrain, and reproduce before scarcity killed them. Given enough time, selection could transform a forest giant into a compact, powerfully built relic, perhaps 6 or 7 feet long when extended, but normally moving low on 4 limbs. That body would not require fantasy anatomy. It would need broad joints, a low center of mass, powerful forelimbs, and deliberate movement across unstable rock. It might rise briefly to inspect its surroundings, but sustained upright walking would waste energy and increase stress. In darkness, speed would matter less than balance. Silence would matter more than display. Its diet would also have to broaden. A specialist tied to one forest food would repeat the fatal mistake of its ancestor. A survivor would exploit roots, fruit, bark, insects, eggs, and perhaps small vertebrates. The jaw inherited from a plant processing giant would remain formidable, but flexibility, not raw strength, would keep the species alive. And then there is sound. Some living mammals use very low-frequency calls to communicate over long distances. Dense vegetation blocks vision, while low frequencies travel through forest and around obstacles more effectively than sharp, high calls. A nocturnal primate living among deep valleys and caves might favor low, resonant vocalizations that humans feel more readily than hear. That does not mean a creature could press a supernatural fear button inside the human brain. Research on infrasound remains complex, and its effects depend on frequency, intensity, duration, and individual sensitivity. Strong, low-frequency exposure has been associated with pressure, unease, disorientation, and other physical symptoms. The exact mechanisms and many popular claims about vibrating eyeballs remain disputed. For an animal, however, the weapon would not need to be magical. It would only need to make a frightened human misjudge one step in the dark. At noon, Lena and Bao reached the northern cave. Minh's climbing rope still hung from an anchor near the entrance. It had not snapped. Someone had untied the lower end and coiled it neatly beneath the ledge. 30 meters inside, daylight collapsed into a narrow gray ribbon behind them. Bao's thermal camera showed bats overhead and warm water moving through cracks below. Nothing else. Then Lena found Minh's helmet. The lamp had been removed, not broken, removed. 2 screws lay side by side on a flat stone. Across the plastic shell were 4 parallel scratches packed with the same red clay found on the shelter. Lena called his name. The cave returned it in fragments. Minh! Minh! Minh!
A pulse moved through the chamber. Bao dropped the thermal camera. Lena's knees buckled as pressure filled her chest. Her headlamp seemed to dim, although the battery indicator remained full. On the wall ahead, a shadow expanded and contracted with her heartbeat. She forced herself to look away.
The shadow was not moving. She was. Her balance had begun to fail. Bao staggered toward a narrow passage on the right. "Stop," Lena said. He did not hear her, or could not understand her. His breathing had become fast and shallow, and every step carried him closer to a vertical shaft hidden beyond the edge of their light. Lena threw herself forward and caught his pack. His boot slid over empty space. Stones fell for 6 seconds before striking water below. The low pulse ended. Bao collapsed against the wall. From the darkness behind them came 3 soft clicks. Not echoes. The intervals were wrong. 3 more answered from deeper in the cave. Lena turned her headlamp toward the sound. The beam crossed wet limestone, mineral curtains, and a ledge 10 meters above the floor. Something pulled back from the light. She saw no face, only a forearm covered in dark, mud-streaked hair, and a hand curling over the ledge. The fingers were shorter than a human's. The palm was enormous. Each knuckle bore a pale pad of thickened tissue. Then the hand disappeared. Bao whispered, "There are 2. Lena looked down at the thermal camera. Its cracked screen still displayed the chamber. Bao was wrong. There were 4 warm shapes positioned along the passages around them. They were not closing in. They were controlling the exits. Lena finally understood Minh's message. It knows light did not mean the animal feared their lamps. It had learned that humans followed light, and that a moving beam could steer them toward any opening the creature left unguarded. One passage remained clear. On the floor inside it lay Minh's orange field jacket. The fabric was clean, folded, deliberately visible. It was bait. Lena shut off her headlamp. Bao grabbed her wrist, but she pulled him down beside her. In absolute darkness, the creatures lost the easiest way to direct them. Lena placed one hand on the wall and followed the airflow she had noticed when they entered. Cold air meant an opening. The pulse returned, weaker this time, vibrating through her teeth. She counted her steps so the pressure could not steal her sense of distance. 7, 8, 9. Something breathed less than an arm's length away. Lena kept moving. Her fingers touched rope. Not their rope. A second line had been tied along the wall using a ranger's directional knot, the knot Minh had taught her when they were children. She followed it through a crack too narrow for the larger shapes behind them. At the far end, beneath a shelf of stone, they found a dry chamber. Minh was alive. His left ankle was fractured, his radio was gone, and dried blood covered one side of his face. But beside him lay 3 empty water bottles that were not part of his field kit. Each had been placed within reach. Around the chamber entrance, the mud held repeated knuckle marks, but none crossed the final meter toward him. The creatures had trapped him, or they had kept him there. Lena never learned which. The 3 of them escaped through a narrow sinkhole at dusk. Before leaving, Lena recovered the thermal camera and the fiber from the shelter. But during the descent, rain flooded her pack. The camera's storage board corroded. The sample tube remained sealed, yet laboratory testing produced only degraded environmental material, contaminated by human and known primate DNA. Nothing conclusive survived. That is where evidence ends and the unanswered question begins. Gigantopithecus was real. Its extinction window, enormous teeth, and inability to cope with changing forest resources are supported by fossil evidence. A dwarfed, cave-adapted descendant using low-frequency communication is not. It is a speculative animal, built from real evolutionary pressures, not a species recognized by science. But the Annamite forests offer one final warning against certainty. In 1992, scientists identified the saula, a large forest bovid previously unknown to modern science, after unusual horns were found during a survey in Vietnam. The discovery proved that substantial mammals can escape scientific recognition in remote, heavily vegetated terrain. It did not prove that giant apes survived there. It proved only that absence becomes difficult to measure when the landscape itself is designed to hide things. Months later, after Minh recovered, Lena isolated one detail from his damaged recording. Beneath the low pulses was a rhythm too faint to notice in the cave. 4 calls, then a 5th, much smaller voice answering from beside him. An adult can hide for a night. A species can hide only if it is breeding. Science tells us Gigantopithecus was trapped by its enormous size, starving as the ancient forests vanished. But nature is ruthless, and true monsters are born from sheer desperation. Did an isolated branch of giants survive by shrinking into the caves and using infrasound to paralyze their prey? Or is the profound darkness of the mountains simply playing tricks on our minds? Drop your theory in the comments below. What other extinct apex predators do you think are still hiding out there? Subscribe to What If Animals to unlock the next chapter of speculative evolution. Because sometimes, extinction is just a cover story.